What if Ahsoka became the Mandalore? The Grand Army of the Republic's departure from Mandalore was taking longer than anyone anticipated, but it gave Bo-Katan time to think. The darksaber had been found on Maul when they had captured him. It was a symbol of leadership that almost all true Mandalorians would follow, and her having it would allow her to unite the Mandalorians better than her sister ever could. However, she had made many mistakes and was unsure if she could lead her people. Not only that, but she hadn't been the one to win the darksaber, something that many would find fault with. Even though the reason she went against Maul was because he was an outsider that claimed the title of Mandalore, she didn't have nearly as strong a feeling as who had recently won against him, Ahsoka Tano. Though they met as enemies, they had a lot in common, and her compassion is something she shared with her sister. Even though she was an outsider, Bo-Katan believed she could make a good leader of her people. With this decision, she soon sought out Ahsoka Tano. Upon finding her, Bo-Katan confided in her that she isn't sure if she could lead Mandalore and be who the people needed her to be. Then proceeded to tell that according to tradition, she also had no right to claim the title. The leader was recognized by whoever held the darksaber, and it could only be won in combat. Ahsoka had won it from Maul, thus making her the Mandalore. Bo-Katan reassured her that she understood if she didn't want this man's leadership, and she honestly didn't know if it was the right thing to do anyway, but asked her to at least think about it. Ahsoka was ready to decline. Her trust and faith in herself were still damaged, so how could she lead a people that she knew little about and had no relation with? But she gave in, promising Bo-Katan that she would think about it and tell her by the time the clones were ready to leave. Ahsoka went to find Rex for an update on the departure time, and to confide in him about what Bo-Katan had offered. On the way, she felt her bond with Anakin flare with emotion as what felt like battle took place. She hastened to Rex and got to him as a receiver of communication. She paused and waited for him to be free, but the person's words grabbed her attention. Before she could process them, Rex answered, saying, "Yes, Lord Sidious." Ahsoka started to approach him, questioning him, trying to disprove what she had just heard, but he had interrupted her, shouting at her to stay back as several troopers started surrounding her. Rex continued, urging her to find Fives as tears made their path down his dirt-smudged face, before he and the rest of the troopers started firing. Ahsoka ignited her lightsabers to block the shots, at first instinctively redirecting their shots back at them, before she realized with horror at what she was doing. She frantically began directing the shots away, either into the air or into the ground, the only places that wouldn't harm anyone. She started to feel Jedi dying, their pain and fear crying the Force. Each shot that slammed into the lightsaber seemed to coincide with a new wave of Jedi dying, till it eventually synced up with the pounding of her heart. The Mandalorians immediately took notice of what was happening, and, though at first hesitant, moved to help Ahsoka at Bo-Katan's initiative. As they were about to fire at the clones though, Ahsoka shouted at them, telling them to stun and immobilize them instead of killing them, not wanting them to be hurt. They complied, and the squad of clones that had surrounded Ahsoka was promptly neutralized and locked up. Thinking of the message Rex had received, Ahsoka acted quickly. She asked Bo-Katan's help in boarding the tribunal, which was still hovering in the atmosphere above the city after receiving Maul. Then the other two Star Destroyers which were in orbit. Ahsoka couldn't allow any more transmissions from getting through, or allow any clone from sending him a transmission. Also, the Star Destroyers were a serious threat to the city if they turned on it, so that was more than enough reason for Bo-Katan to agree to help her. They had a handful of hand-picked Mandalorians board an LAAT, and, using the codes that Ahsoka knew so well as the lie that they were transporting men who were wounded for killing Ahsoka, they managed to get clearance to land in the tribunal. Waiting for him were only a handful of clones that they subdued without any issue. They split up and fought their way to both bridges. They were relatively easy to take, the small garrison not having enough time to put up defenses, and only bridge personnel waiting for them. Once they were both secured and communications blocked, Ahsoka finally allowed herself to breathe and process what had happened. Could Maul have something to do with this? He was on the ship, and she could fire away to him, but would he cooperate with her even if she did? That is, if he was still alive. She found herself trembling as her thoughts drifted to Rex, his hands shaking with tears in his eyes as he told her to find Fives. Fives, a name she hadn't heard since before she had been expelled from the Jedi Order. Realizing she needed a more solid plan and reason not to kill the clones, Ahsoka let the Mandalorians control the bridges and went to where the Ashmeks were stored. Ahsoka activated them all before asking them to search archives for CT-5555, having to use Anakin's passcode to do so. It saddened her to hear that he had been killed, but she pushed ahead and read every report that mentioned his name from the last time she saw him. She learned of the actions and fate of Tup, the Kaminoan's original story, then Five's version told by Rex, who had felt something off about the whole ordeal. As she read, fear and dread seeped through her. This was bigger than anyone could have imagined. Ahsoka forced her to focus on the task at hand, finding out what was happening and hopefully helping the clones. Removing the chips that Fives had spoken of seemed to be the best bet. She contacted Bo-Katan, briefly telling her findings before asking for a few volunteers to help secure the medical bay. She herself volunteered, not completely believing what Ahsoka had said, and met Ahsoka at the base of the towers where they then fought their way to the medical bay. They happened upon Jesse on the way, desperately trying to stop them, so Ahsoka knocked him out before throwing him over her shoulder, using the Force help with his weight. Ahsoka was hesitant, fearing that if they removed the chip, the trooper would die like Tup, but she had hope in Jesse. He was strong and resilient. He was also second in command after Rex, so he was a good first choice to get on their side if it succeeded. While the Mandalorians watched the door, Ahsoka placed Jesse on the table and let the Ashmeks start the scan. Wanting to speed it up and with the partner from the Force, Ahsoka placed her hands on Jesse's head and fell around with the Force. She found herself murmuring, "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me." She breathed easier when the Ashmeks alerted her that the scanner found something, and straightened to let what she hoped was a chip to be extracted, praying that it wouldn't kill Jesse in the process. When she looked to the doorway, she found the Mandalorians leaning against the wall, relaxing next to a pile of unconscious clones. So gonna have time to process this as the Ashmek asked if she would like the extracted mass, to which she hesitantly said yes, stuffing in her pocket without a second thought. Looking at Jesse's vitals, he seemed stable, so without waiting for him to wake up, she moved on to the next trooper. They knew exactly where the chip was, so they didn't need Ahsoka's help finding it, leaving her free to watch Jesse. They removed the chips from 4 of the clones before he started to wake up, and Ahsoka waited in apprehension. However, instead of being hostile like she feared, he was instead confused and dazed. It took Ahsoka telling him what had happened for him to remember, and horror covered his face. He profusely apologized to Ahsoka, both for his actions and for the other troopers. Ahsoka assured him that she was alright and that he needed to focus on his brothers. It was a lie, of course. She could never be alright or forget what happened, but she would pretend to be, for her brother's sake. She made sure that Jesse was truly fine along with the other clones that are waking up, all appearing to be back to their normal selves. Leaving them take over the process of removing the chips from the rest of the men on the tribunal, she and the Mandalorians moved on to the next vendor. On the way, Bo-Katan sent orders to the Mandalorians on the surface to remove the chips from the clones there, starting with Rex. A few clones were bringing Ashmek to the surface, as it knew where the chips were. One was sitting on the tribunal to help there, and Ahsoka was taking 2 more for the next 2 vendors. Now they knew what to do, they quickly secured the next 2 vendors, though they still shut down the communications first before advancing to the medical bay. By nightfall, all the chips had been removed from every clone, and they were back to their usual selves, albeit with heavy guilt after they remembered what they had attempted to do. Most of them had been wearing the helmets that they had painted for Ahsoka's return. They had been wearing the markings of her face when they had turned on her, their show of support having been turned into a nightmare. Ahsoka would do her best to forget this, instead of forcing herself to be thinking that her fate wasn't the same as Maul's, who had been helpless as the clones killed him in the Mandalorian sarcophagus. Thankfully, Bo-Katan was willing to give them refuge for their hope in liberating Mandalore, and they accepted for the time being, not knowing what else to do. Rex did also act quickly and sent distress codes and false information to GR, essentially faking theirs and Ahsoka's deaths. Ahsoka, on the other hand, even after several days, was still trying to come to terms with all the deaths she had felt, and finally asked Bo-Katan for a shuttle. Using it, she flew to Coruscant, wanting to see firsthand if the Jedi Order was still alive. When she got to Coruscant, she was greeted with the news that the Republic had been turned into an empire. However, that was overshadowed when the Jedi Temple came into sight, and she lost all hope for the Jedi. The temple was burning with black smoke billowing from it. Even from this distance, she could see clones guarding the entrance while more walked in and out, their white armor like a stain against the temple walls. The Jedi Temple had fallen. What was the fate of the countless infants, younglings, and Padawans? What was the fate of the rest of the Jedi? Deep down, Ahsoka knew the answer. With how firm control the ships had, if a clone had found them, then there would be no survivors. Ahsoka's grip tightened around the controls, showing the number of the feeling of the Jedi dying, the hundreds, no, thousands of lives had been snuffed out. She felt the hole where Anakin's presence once was, having disappeared with Plo Koon's and the rest. She remembered the horror and grief of the clones that had been freed from the ships. She wanted to save the rest of the clones who had been turned into puppets. She wanted revenge for those Jedi that were unjustly slain. Ahsoka wanted to avenge those that were her family, Plo Koon, Obi-Wan, Anakin. She wanted those that ordered the deaths of the hundreds of the young Jedi that were just children to pay the price. She wanted this new galactic empire to burn. Ahsoka turned the shuttle around, immediately heading back to Mandalore. The entire trip, her anger and hatred grew as she relived the clones' betrayal, the sight of the Jedi Temple, and how helpless she was in all of it. Cleanup from the battle was still underway when she got back to Mandalore, which was to be expected from how devastating it was. Rex was the first person she saw, but she wasn't looking for him. She was looking for Bo-Katan. Ahsoka decided to take up her offer to become the Mandalore so that she could bring vengeance. However, Rex stepped in front of her. He could tell something was off. Ahsoka tried to bypass him, but he grabbed her arm and insisted on talking. The emotion in his voice made her waver, and she relented, letting him lead her into a secluded place. He asked what she saw in Coruscant, and she told him about the state of the Jedi Temple and the declaration of the Empire. This shook him, but he managed to keep his cool and he asked what she was planning. She told him that she wanted revenge, and at that Rex interrupted her. He told her that he and some other troopers had talked, and they wanted to free their brothers who were still being controlled by the chips. He understood that she wanted vengeance, but if she did it now, not only would his brothers suffer, but so would the Mandalorians who dragged them into this. The person she was after had already used innocent lives to achieve their goals, so they wouldn't hesitate to do so again if it meant protecting themselves. Ahsoka processed his words for several hours, her resolve shaken but also solidifying. Who was the victor of this war? Not the Separatists, not the Jedi, not the clones, not even the Republic or its people, as there was no longer a Republic. Darth Sidious was the one that she wanted vengeance against, him and his loyal followers. But she had no chance of getting to him now, not only with how weak her position was, but there was also too many innocent people between them, and she didn't know who he was. She wanted revenge, but not at the expense of the clones, the Mandalorian people, or any other Darth Sidious's victims. With her new resolve, she finally went and found Bo-Katan. Upon finding her, Ahsoka told that she would accept the title Mandalore, but only if Bo-Katan was fine with her people resisting the Empire and its creators. Bo-Katan, who had already heard from Rex what she had seen on Coruscant, as well as other reports from across the galaxy, saw the writing on the wall. Perhaps this Empire promised peace, but her people are made for war. Even if they had good intentions, the Empire wouldn't leave them alone. The previous attack from the Jedi Republic had turned her homeworld into a wasteland, and the attack hadn't even been justified. She wouldn't let this Empire finish the job. However, she also didn't want the galaxy to turn on her people. Bo-Katan told Ahsoka that she was fine with her people who fought this Empire, but only if they were attacked first. She would not let her people wage an unprovoked war. Ahsoka agreed, understanding where she came from. Without saying another word, Bo-Katan unclipped the darksaber from her belt and held out to Ahsoka. Ahsoka hesitated only once more, her hand wavering over the darksaber, before she gently grabbed it from Bo-Katan's hand and ignited it. There was no turning back now. Ahsoka was now the Mandalore. A nervous smile crept out as the way the decision hit her, and Ahsoka gingerly asked if Bo-Katan could continue to be by her side. Even though she knew little of leadership, she knew her people. Bo-Katan readily agreed, and days began to pass. Their priority was to clean up Mandalore while Rex and the other troopers went out to free their brothers. Ahsoka initially went with them, but after too many instances of clones losing their reason upon seeing her, it was agreed that it would be better if she stayed out of it for the most part. So, instead, Ahsoka focused all her efforts on Mandalore and its subjects. She quickly realized there was a lot that she didn't understand about her new subjects. This ended up with her seeking out Bo-Katan and asking her to teach her about her people, their traditions, history, and way of life. Bo-Katan was happy to comply, relieved that Ahsoka was taking this seriously, unlike Maul. She began teaching Ahsoka everything she asked, along with many things she didn't, including how to fight like a Mandalorian. As leader of the Mandalorians, while they rebuilt, Ahsoka pardoned all those that opposed them if they were willing to bow to her and swear loyalty. There are several that didn't. So, taking advice from Bo-Katan, Ahsoka offered them a chance to fire for the darksaber. A few tried, though of course none succeeded, and Ahsoka made sure to use the darksaber to defeat them. The darksaber's handle and blade were unique and different from her primary lightsaber, but she believed that she'd get used to it with time, especially since the blade was about the same length. Whenever she ignited it, she also noticed that any Mandalorian present became more eager to follow her, and she got the feeling that they revered and respected her for it. Ahsoka wasn't fond of the idea that the leader was whoever was strongest. Its faults clear with someone like Maul taking over. It was a very Sith way of thinking, and very destructive. But she wouldn't question it. At least, not now. It soon became apparent how successful Rex was as more and more clones appeared on Mandalore. They came from several different units, with some from every corner of the galaxy. Rex had his troopers infiltrate a mission taken on by the clones. They then leaked the details of that mission to Rex, who led his troopers to ambush the clone unit and capture them all before removing their chips. They also started capturing non-clone officers that had begun leading the clone units, though Rex wasn't sure what to do with them as of now. Still, Rex's attacks became more daring and moved up from capturing only a squad of clones at a time to capturing entire bases and ships. The clones that joined him infiltrated the ship or base, until there was enough of them to take it over. If it was a base, it was quickly cleaned out of anything useful, which was brought back to Mandalore. There was soon a small city of clones of Mandalore full of military supplies and ordnance, as well as a sizable fleet in orbit. However, over half the clones had refused to desert with Rex, even after the chips had been removed, opting to stay with the Empire. They had sympathy for Rex and his cause, so they kept silent about it, but their loyalty was to the Republic, even if it was now an Empire. Ahsoka had a hard time understanding and accepting this, but Rex urged her not to judge them, at least until the Empire started openly showing its true colors. Unfortunately, they had to worry about spies among the clones that deserted as well. There are those who are wholeheartedly devoted to the new Empire, which Ahsoka forced herself to reason with, but the more worrying ones were the few that had been brainwashed, no, programmed into being loyal. Rex and Ahsoka met often. Ahsoka needed someone to talk to as her thoughts and emotions were still a mess. It was during one of these talks that Rex casually mentioned that he wanted to continue to follow her and help her to get revenge, but he wasn't sure how long the clones could be useful with their accelerated aging. Ahsoka thought for only a moment before telling him to get a squad together. Upon his inquiry, Ahsoka told him that they were going to get a Kaminoan scientist to solve that problem, the problem they had created. Part of this was because Ahsoka wanted revenge against the Kaminoans. They had been the ones that put the chips in the clones. By this, the Kaminoans were the ones that forced the clones to kill the Jedi, making the clones victims. They would pay for this. Rex didn't argue, instead following her orders. The squad was ready sooner than Ahsoka expected, and they took capture of the Camino. The entire trip went smooth. They even got clearance to land. As Ahsoka walked off the shuttle, it was immediately obvious that Rex had been planning this for a while now, and she wondered exactly how long. Maybe not with the part of kidnapping the Kaminoans, but the takeover to Boca City. There were several skirmishes on the surface, but Rex told her that the fleet in orbit had already been secured, and communication had been blocked. Acclimators came from orbit as if to verify a statement, and they began to be loaded. Because of the new objective, to find a cure for the accelerated aging, they grabbed everything. They took every clone with them, from trooper to cadet to the ones that were still being grown in tubes. Rex knew that if any remained, the Empire wouldn't let them survive. So, Even if he had to detain his brothers, he wouldn't let them remain in the Empire to be killed. Whatever medical equipment that could be moved was also taken. Their archive seized and every Kaminoan arrested. They emptied the Poke City of everything that could be useful, leaving only what they couldn't take. Ahsoka knew that Rex's light hadn't been planning on being this severe, but she didn't care. The Kaminoans deserved it. She also went in search of Nala Se herself, wanting to make sure that she especially was arrested. Ahsoka managed to find her, and surprisingly, she found a young human girl with her. The girl tried to stand up for Nala Se, but Ahsoka, who was unnerved with the similarities between her and the other clones, told her that no one would be harmed if they behaved and did what was asked of them. Without waiting for an answer, Ahsoka pushed them along onto a shuttle, making sure they were heavily guarded as, if anyone could solve the accelerated aging, Ahsoka was sure it would be Nala Se. She also didn't feel the slightest bit guilty with how rough she had been, as it was Nala Se who had been the one dismissing what Phison said, the one who seemed to have covered up everything about Phison top after they both died. Things passed quickly after that, the entire raid taking almost a full day, but almost everything was done within a few hours. The long thing being that Rex had wanted to erase the Kaminoan archives of anything about the clones, and, even though it pained him, to destroy the Jango Fett DNA samples, not wanting anything to fall into the Empire's hands. With this raid, it should be obvious to everyone that the clones were rebelling, and he wouldn't leave anything that could be used against them. Ahsoka stayed with him, impulsively wanting to destroy Poke City once they were done, but Rex managed to talk her out of it, saying that it would turn many of the clones against her. Several days passed, and, contrary to all their expectations, the Empire had instead covered up what had happened on Kamino. The only indicator anything had happened was that security was strengthened and discrimination and discard of clones increased, with them being sidelined or used as disposable assets. Also, the Kaminoan people that remained on Kamino were arrested. It was possibly the reason they didn't go after the clones. The Empire instead believing it was a plot of the Kaminoans. This left Ahsoka happy that she could do something for the clones that had chosen to join Rex and be there for her. The indirect retaliation against the clones that were still in the Empire didn't bother her, as it was their choice to remain. She might have once seen them as brothers, but they had betrayed her for the Empire. On the other hand, now she had several hundred more mouths to feed in-house. The economy of Mandalore was still in ruins, and they had to import almost everything for survival. Rex offered her the answer after she shared her concerns with him. The Empire was making moves to seize Count Dooku's assets that were stored on Sereno. His a war chest in massive proportions. What if they took it for themselves?